So, and I know it's one of those subjects where it's like I'm excited to talk about it,
Hmm.
but it's still so tragic simultaneously.
Hmm.
But for some people, the latest news has been at least a positive sign. I'm not sure exactly how to make sense of it. So let's take a step back. What happened?
So, as of this morning, there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. Basically, France and the U.S. Are going to be working with Lebanon and Israel to maintain peace at their shared border. It started at 4 a.m. Beirut time. Last night was really hard for many Lebanese. I was on the phone with people all through the night. It was really rough in Beirut. My places like I know very well and love and walk down all the time, Hamra, Marilies were targeted, and so is the rest of the country, like it has been for 2 months. It's interesting. The ceasefire deal basically calls for a 2-month initial halt in fighting and will require Hezbollah to end its armed presence in a large swath of southern Lebanon, while basically the Israeli troops return to their side of the border. It's kind of like an upgraded version of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. So basically, in the next 2 months, Hezbollah fighters are like going to retreat 25 miles from the border, and Israeli forces will withdraw from Lebanon completely. And in their stead, thousands of like Lebanese troops and UN peacekeepers will deploy to the south. And an international panel by the US will kind of monitor all of the sides' compliances. I think what the biggest question now is like how do they actually implement this? But I think to wrap what I'm saying up is that a lot of people find this to be a really happy moment. And a lot of others are still really, their hearts are with Gaza. And I think that there's a balancing of these two extreme feelings: hope for Lebanon and heaviness for Gaza.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about Gaza in just a second. A question came in from Bullet the Bunny who said the Lebanese military will keep the North Line, right?
Yeah, so they're going to put the military and UNIFIL sort of in between, kind of south of the Litani River. One question I have, which is kind of a big question, is like, how will the LAF tell Hezbollah what to do? Kind of like, I don't see exactly that part like being very clear. But yeah, I think one really big thing is that the conditions for the ceasefire kind of rest on the Lebanese army taking a lot of responsibility. I think that that's like just something that we need to acknowledge is happening. And, you know, I don't know if I think that they're up for the job. I believe in them. But it kind of means dismantling and disarming Hezbollah and all of these other militias like Amal and Palestinian militias south of the Litani River. And I don't see that happening. Like, I don't necessarily see that really happening.
Why?
I just don't think that a group of people who just successfully fended. I mean, this is I saw a tweet today that really, really like spoke to me. It's like one thing I read today was from someone named Zahra. She said a group of men, some who lost their eyes and fingers from the pager attacks, and all who lost their core leadership, their security general, their highest commanding officers, with no aerial power, no advanced weaponry, only their feet planted firmly on the soil of their homeland. They forced a retreat of one of the biggest, most formidable armies in the world. Why would they sort of disarm themselves completely now? I just don't think after like being the defense of Lebanon, they'll necessarily do that. And I know one important thing to remember is the last time the state sort of tried to tell Hezbollah what to do, they turned on the Lebanese people. This was in 2008. They invaded Beirut, the Shuf, they killed people, they raided political party offices, they blew up TV stations and occupied the capital, So I don't think they will totally disarm. I think that they will be part and parcel of this game, like this, not game, but this, mechanical sort of like just like truce and try to hold to that. But, I don't see that why they would completely disarm and be like, okay, we're done.
Along those lines, I was thinking about why Israel complies with this or even agrees to this. One of the things that's happened since October 7th is that Israel has attempted to restore its image, the global perception of the Israeli military as somewhat undefeatable, impenetrable, or at the very least formidable. I mean, one of the things that happened on October 7th, 2023 was that in some ways the curtain was pulled down. People said, wait a minute, this is a defeatable foe. The borders of the so-called borders of Israel are actually not impregnable, and Israel in many ways was caught asleep at the wheel in terms of the Hamas, the invasion of Hamas and its affiliated fighter groups. So Israel is going to great lengths to look formidable again, powerful again, undefeatable again. To that end, I worried that a ceasefire wouldn't happen in Lebanon precisely for that reason, that Israel would not want to look like they had to bend or that they had to yield to the power or even threat of power from Hezbollah. What do you think the Israel's calculus is here?
I think that the northern front got too expensive. I think Hezbollah has tens of thousands of fighters still. I think that they were, up until even just a few weeks ago, they were still launching rockets and drones at Tel Aviv. Israel couldn't meaningfully advance in southern Lebanon. They could never really hold ground. It was simply too costly for the 60,000 Israelis who are displaced. There's soldiers being killed by Hezbollah. And I think Israel's economy I think the economy's back, is doing better now, but I think that they really were downgraded at some point. Ultimately, Hezbollah was too strong, and they didn't kind of, the calculus of fighting Hezbollah, like, they couldn't beat them. I think that Hezbollah is now claiming victory, which I think is a really interesting, and their take is that, listen, we proclaimed victory, we won. We're all going back to our houses. Israeli settlers aren't even going back to their houses. Like the south, the Bekaa, the southern suburbs, they're not the people that are returning. And I think ultimately Israel saw that Iran and Gaza are a more important sort of front for them. I think that Hezbollah is just too difficult to beat.
Is it unreasonable to say that Hezbollah unequivocally did win this fight, this battle, not a war, but the battle?
I think ultimately, when you think about it, for resistance, all they have to do is survive, because Israel's very stated goals were to bring back their settlers to the north. They didn't do that. To destroy Hamas, to destroy Hezbollah, they didn't do that. So I think when the dust settles and you look back on this, it'll be a lot like 2006, where you just say, well, this group of men who had been destroyed, like their leadership has been devastated, still somehow managed to hold the line and not let them sort of take over any ground. And they were fighting an aerial army that's huge. I do think that it's important to say that Hezbollah's victory is limited by the fact that Beirut and southern Lebanon and parts of just the whole country are decimated, devastated. There's so much to think about in that regard.
What does decimated mean? What does decimated mean, Afeef, in this context? I mean, we've seen decimated and we've seen decimated. Here in the United States, Ferguson or New Orleans might be seen as devastated, right? And then you go to Khan Yunis or not Khan Yunis. You go to Rafah, for example. Then you really see devastation. You go to Gaza City and you see, different levels of devastation here. Break it down for me. What does it look like there?
There's a lot of pieces to devastation, right? There's over 1 million people are displaced. A lot of them are going back to homes that are demolished. A lot of infrastructure is demolished. 3,700 people are killed. 14,000 people are injured. There's $3.4 billion in damages, says the World Bank in Lebanon. $1.1 billion of that damage is agricultural damage. Countless farms are burned up, destroyed. White phosphorus was reportedly used. The GDP is possibly contracting by 6.6% this year. And then that's not even discussing the thousands of buildings, structures that are destroyed. And then on top of all of that, you have healthcare, which is just decimated. 220 health workers have been killed. There have been over 65 attacks on hospitals. The priority right now is to replenish stocks of medicines, because ultimately people don't have medicine, they don't have emergency care available. And then, there's been a statistic that 3 children were killed daily over the past 2 minutes. Every 2
My God.
days, every day there has been 3 kids killed in the last 2 months. So I think devastation is relative. I think Gaza is extremely devastated. I think Lebanon went into this with hyperinflation and it was on the brink of collapse as it was. I mean, you guys remember the port blast in 2020. There was just so much economic Ponzi scheming going on. The same warlords who ran Lebanon decades ago are still running Lebanon now and stealing all of its money. So this war came at a time where the Lebanese literally couldn't afford it. So it was a huge sacrifice. So I think people are really relieved that it's over, but also really feeling heavy that it's not over for Gaza yet either.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Gaza because Chef Shire asks, why can't they bring UNFIL into Gaza as well?
It's a very good question. A lot of people are asking, why aren't they doing a lot of similar things in Gaza that they would do in Lebanon? I think ultimately the UN created Israel, and then Israel sort of bit back its creator, right? So like it's like one of these things. It's kind of like Frankenstein. It's like you watched the UN create Israel get birthed into the world, and then start biting back at the UN. So I think that the UN is like, invited into southern Lebanon, but UNRWA, as you see, is called Hamas all the time in Gaza. So I think like ultimately, I don't know that Israel wants that kind of peacekeeping mission. I don't know. I can't speak on it because I'm not sure, but I imagine that.
But I think that's right. I think there's a great, and for those watching, UNFIL is the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, and they're ostensibly, not ostensibly, they're a peacekeeping force. They've been around since '78 for this purpose. But I think you're right. I think there's such antipathy toward the UN and anything UN related in Israel Palestine on the Israeli side, and as you pointed out, Israel's relationship to the UN is such a complicated one, and it's a messy one. And I'm not sure that it would work as effectively in Gaza, or that it would work at all in Gaza. But it's a thought. It really is a great question. Levi A wrote in and said, "Did Hezbollah violate ceasefire?"
So all I have heard since the ceasefire has been that at least one Israeli airstrike has jolted the capital. Even just moments, it was just moments after Biden kind of declared this. And then I actually today, I read on TRT that Israel injured at least 3 journalists documenting the return of displaced Lebanese. It is being described as the first violation of the ceasefire. It reportedly injured a photojournalist with the AP and a reporter with the Russian agency Sputnik. I know that the Israeli military has been warning Lebanese residents to stay away from like the previously evacuated areas in the south and east and around the capital of Beirut too. But I mean, several highways have been crowded, vehicles, people carrying their like Hezbollah flags going all the way down to the south to their homes. A lot of them are in ruins, but I ultimately think that the ceasefire will be violated a few times before we hear about it. So I think that there will be on the ground violations here and there. I think that there's a difference when something gets escalated and then they have to like call off the ceasefire, because it's very clear that the Western powers that be decided that a ceasefire was now it was now time for a ceasefire. So they've sort of decided it and they've applied it. And I think that ultimately Israel wants the ceasefire, so it's why it's happening.
Why does Israel want the ceasefire right now?
I think that they're suffering. I think they want to reload. I think that they need to focus on Hamas, and I think that they need to focus on. I think that they just didn't succeed. I think ultimately they failed their goals in Lebanon, and I think that like it became costly. Like I just think that the 60,000 people in the north wanted to get returned quickly. I think that they wanted to start settling Lebanon. I think that to beat Hezbollah would take so much more weaponry, so much more on the ground work, that I just think that they're tired. Like that's my big read on it. I'm not sure if that is fair because they could also just be, listen, I don't trust Israel. I don't trust what they say. So they could easily be doing something to regroup and concentrate on Iran. I think that they're also waiting for Trump. I think 60 or plus days, Trump is going to be in office. There's going to be a whole new mandate happening. So I just think that they're waiting. I think they're waiting.
The United States is being presented to the global community right now as a broker of peace,
right?
Which is so fascinating to me. What does this mean for President Biden, particularly as he's in the last days, not just of his presidency, but maybe of his legacy shaping kind of journey? And what does this mean for the U.S.'s role in Middle East relations right now?
I think that Biden and I think his administration they're really trying to get some wins in and shape a post sort of war situation before Trump gets there so that they can sort of have things in place and also claim the victory, claim that they were peace brokers, but they're not peace brokers. They're just people who are like, everybody get out of the way. We're going to like make sure this works for our baby in the Middle East. And I think that I think Biden just literally just wanted to win. I think there was a moment where there was just a really good opportunity to call it in Lebanon. And as they were calling it, it was so maniacal. They bombed the hell out of the country. So I just think that I'm cynical. I just think Biden wants to win. I think Biden is going to try to get a ceasefire in Gaza. I think it's going to be all very flimsy. And then I think Trump is going to come in. For the next 2 months, it might be a little bit quiet. And then Trump's going to come in and try to do deals. And I think it's going to be like I don't know what it's going to be like with Trump. I actually don't want to conjecture. I think that it's going to be a lot of deals and they're going to be random. And I think that's a part of this situation that we're going to have to sort of brace for is the randomness of Trump. You know, the viability of Trump, how Trump sways is going to be very interesting to watch.
I think so too. Before we go, a question came in from New York Yankee 718. It said, "Why are you ignoring Iran? Also wanted a ceasefire to save Hezbollah." What do you say to that?
I don't know that Iran. I feel like Iran. Okay, so in my opinion, I feel like Iran kind of sold Hezbollah down the river a little bit in the last couple of months. I think with Nasrallah, and I think that they just realized that they need to get a nuclear deal. I think their economy is really bad. I think that Hezbollah is someone that they help out and fund, and they definitely want to help. But I also think that like ultimately they cut their losses, and I think there's this. To my imagination, I think Iran has too much to deal with domestically to like really want any of this. I think all of their missiles back were coordinated. I think that this has been a dance the entire time. I think when we finally the news hits our sort of like while we experience the news, so much has happened to like build up to what we're experiencing. And I think that Iran and Israel probably had some coordinated dance to say, hey, this is what we're taking and this is what you can, sort of fight back with. And then we're going to end it here. And like, I think that we're all just finding out about it. But I imagine Iran just wants to get the hell out of this and help itself just recover.
Speaking of recovery, what does the next phase for Lebanon look like?
Yeah, I think it's going to take years for recovery. I think like the fact of the matter is every third building in the south is demolished. The market of Nabati is demolished. Like the devastation in Lebanon is so great because I feel like the economy isn't there to rebuild. I think it's going to be really a long road ahead. I think one thing that really gives me hope is that there was a lot of unity across the sects, helping each other. Actually, there was a lot of support. A lot of my friends and family were like stepping in where the state just wasn't available. And I think one of the most important things that we can cling on to for the next however long is that Lebanon did come together at a time when 1 million people were displaced and really needed community. And the community really stepped up. They sourced mattresses from Syria. They were donating blood. They were finding food and giving it for free. I've been reading so many letters of people leaving just handwritten letters to their sort of not landlords, but the people that kind of let them in. And they're so heartbreaking and touching. I think there's been so many connections made across Lebanon in a way that I think Lebanon really needs. It's unfortunate because Lebanon is very sectarian, so there's a lot of communities, but I think one thing we can hold on to for rebuilding in the future is that we really can rely on each other.
That's a powerful thing. Now that you've seen the ceasefire in Lebanon, I hear what you're saying about sort of Joe wanting to push things through. I hear Trump I hear you saying Trump is going to kind of do the art of the deal to try and make something happen potentially. How likely is it that you'll see? How likely is that we'll see? I'm going to pick a date here. How likely is that we'll see a ceasefire in Gaza before Ramadan?
I honestly have heard that like Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, they're all sort of trying to work with each other and the US to get a deal done, a Hamas and Israeli ceasefire deal done. I don't see why Israel would want to stop. I can see why they wanted to stop against Hezbollah because I just didn't think that they had enough. But I think ultimately that this is kind of Joe Biden just throwing a Hail Mary. And I can't see Netanyahu. The right wing government wants to settle Gaza. They want to settle South Lebanon. So I think that the very right wing government of Israel actually represents the government of Israel. And I think that like that's just where we're going. And so I think that there's not much I'm not extremely hopeful that a Gaza ceasefire deal will happen. Although I pray, because I know so many people there are suffering. The winter is coming. The tents are makeshift and they're being flooded with water, and people are under such heavy prices and are suffering, and they've been suffering. And I know that they need a ceasefire deal, but I'm not sure where if it's going to
come at all. Yeah. I think, and the reason for those out there, I was saying Ramadan is expected to be the end of February 28th ish. So basically the very top of March, which is about 6 weeks into the Trump presidency. So it's an opportunity for Trump to flex his muscle, say, look, I did what no one else could do. It could be a backdoor deal made already, for all I know. But your lack of certainty or even confidence in a Gaza ceasefire, I think, is consistent with what most experts are saying. No one is optimistic. There was a time where it seemed inevitable. I remember when it was like, a month. We'll do about 100 days, 70 days, 80 days. We were comparing it to previous recent incursions like Cast Lead at Protective Edge. And then it was, it'll definitely go by Ramadan of last year. It will go into April, it will be fine. And then and so forth and so on. And it's gotten to a point now where I think the global community simply doesn't believe it's going to happen. And that terrifies me because I don't have confidence. I believe that it's going to end somehow, some way, because that's just how the world works. But I'm not sure if it'll be a traditional ceasefire as we know it. And I'm not sure, but if it does happen, what will have been irreparably destroyed, and how many lives will have been taken by then. But we'll have to keep following it. But I think the key is for people to remember the facts of this and to uncover the motivations and the strategies that underpin any choice. The ceasefire isn't because countries just got inspired. They didn't have a religious conversion. They didn't get excited. There's a reason.
Right. I think that Trump will afford the situation like an entire reset. So I think that anything can happen actually under Trump. And I think that that's a bit scary because anything can happen in a terrible way. And I do think that he's surprised us in the past. I do think that they are trying to normalize relations with Israel and Saudi. And I think that that is going to be the
sticking point, though,
the framework from which we're like moving through. And so like I think that if there is peace, it will be through, and when I say peace, I mean not violent, catastrophic, like
right.
devastation.
Active genocide, right.
Yeah. Like it's like not genocide. It doesn't mean peace. But I think that through the framework of the normalizing between Saudi and Israel, who all of them just want money. They just want to create economy and business. And I think that that can be great, and it can also leave a lot of people out, which it has historically just left the Palestinians out. So, we pray. That's what we can do.
That's what we do. And as the old enslaved Africans here in the United States used to say, we'll pray while running. We'll keep struggling, we'll keep resisting, but
Absolutely.
we'll also rely on our belief that another world is possible, another outcome is possible. Afeef, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, I love being here and I love talking to you. So I appreciate you bringing me on.